Welcome. I'm Sulani Madsen, and this is a reader feedback edition of Forthright. After having a column rejected covering the former Will Thomas competing as Leah Thomas in the NCAA women's swimming and diving competition, I gave that subject another try 2 weeks later from a different direction. The editor picked up on my headline, "When We Don't Have All the Words." Here it is, as first published on April 7, 2022 in the Spokane Review. How did we devolve to a point where an intelligent, well-educated woman like Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson feels compelled to duck a simple question? "Can you provide a definition for the word woman?" asked Senator Marsha Blackburn at the judge's confirmation hearing. Jackson's coy response was ironic, given that being a woman was one of President Biden's criteria for his Supreme Court nominee. And, "No, I can't, I'm not a biologist," became viral fuel on social media. One meme shows a game warden confronting a hunter, asking why he shot a buck when he had only a cow tag. The hunter shrugs, "I'm not a biologist." Humans are classified as, quote, "male and female based on anatomic and chromosomal characteristics," end quote, according to Mosby's Dictionary of Medicine, Nursing, and Health Professions. Modern biology can delve deeply into the variations and abnormalities within each group, but it doesn't render the basic categories any less relevant to healthcare, daily life, and public policies. Females don't need prostate exams, and males don't need pap smears, regardless of alterations to more obvious anatomical characteristics. I'm not a physicist, but I can usefully divine gravity without researching Stephen Hawking's work on quantum gravitational mechanics. We have the words to distinguish between an out-of-the-ballpark home run and a rocket escaping Earth's orbit as they both disappear from view. But what if we didn't have the words? What if sportscasters were forced to call the game as if the relationship between bat, ball, and gravity required a degree in physics before making an observation of the obvious? What if journalists writing about the unfairness of a trans athlete competing in the women's division of a collegiate sport couldn't use the words biological male to describe the reason for the problem? Mainstream editors following the Associated Press stylebook require writers to refer to the problematic person as if always a woman, making it impossible to have a clear conversation. Any mention of the athlete's name for the first 2 decades of life using the appropriate gendered pronouns is called dead naming instead of history. When Title IX was signed in 1972, feminists pushed for gender-neutral language to change mindsets, holding both boys and girls back from reaching their full potential. Changing fireman to firefighter and dropping the modifier male in front of nurse were signs of progress. Now we have ultra-progressive guides for gender-neutral language pushing boundaries. What is still a good resource on how to list titles and use, or not use, the Oxford comma also sets standards for contemporary word usage as language evolves. The AP stylebook reflects a worldview which believes human beings can change sex by changing pronouns. Its followers are allowed to use phrases like pregnant people. There's a word for that group of people. They're called mothers. Every human being on earth was born of a woman. Woman is a good word. Twitter twits sometimes use the terms bleeders or front holers, terms I find incredibly offensive. J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter books and a master of words, calls such language hostile and alienating. In a lengthy essay on why she chooses to speak out on gender issues, Rowling writes, quote, "Woman is not a costume. Woman is not an idea in a man's head. Woman is not a pink brain, a liking for Jimmy Choos, or any of the other sexist ideas now somehow touted as progressive. Moreover, the inclusive language that calls female people menstruators and people with vulvas strikes many women as dehumanizing and demeaning," end quote. Journalists don't have to use the more ridiculous terms yet, but when they do, it's a signal of either bias or timidity in the trenches. Veterans of the first gender neutrality culture war can't help but notice the language evolution only erases women. No ugly synonyms for men are championed by the progressive mob. Ballers? Front danglers? Rowling is not timid. She has been on the receiving end of death threats after tweeting, quote, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth." End quote. One issue Rowling has repeatedly pointed out, as a survivor of sexual abuse, is the impact of ignoring biological differences between the sexes on the vulnerable. Some women are organizing in Washington to push back against ESHB 1956, dubbed by one irritated woman as the Don't Say Predator Bill. Passed by a progressively driven, Democrat-controlled legislature, the new law, as specifically designed, blocks attempts to protect women serving prison terms. Quote, "You can't ask how many males the women inmates are forced to share cells, showers, and living spaces with," end quote, tweeted Beth Duranciang, vice chairman of the King County Republican Party, after Governor Jay Inslee signed the bill this week. Rowling continues to speak truth. It's harder for those without her power to withstand the pressure, but it's essential to halt the devolution of society into an Orwellian future of newspeak. Now, about that reader feedback. This column generated more positive feedback than any column I've ever written. People appreciated someone saying out loud what they've been thinking, and they responded by email, text, and on social media. Like Justice Jackson, these are people who know what happens when you define woman as an adult human female. It will bring down the wrath of transgender activists. One woman wrote me this. She says, "I posted an article in a private group about a trans who regretted the surgery and pointed out the Libby Center was promoting LGBTQ on a bulletin board, which I disapproved of." She went on to say that as a result, she described how a group of vicious women, in her words, tried to get her fired from her job with a private employer. I mean, it's no wonder Justice Jackson ducked the question. We understand what she was doing. There were a number of naysayers who wrote, and let me start by saying that I agree there are people who are born intersex, and there always have been. WebMD says 1 in 1,000 babies, or about 0.1%, are born with ambiguous external features or with internal organs mismatched to the external features. But remember that, just 0.1%. My mother cared for a baby in the hospital in the 1950s who was born with 3 legs and 1 set of each external part. She said he was very sweet, only lived a few months, but was very difficult to diaper. Such abnormalities are not new, and for such children, there is a place for medical care to step in to improve the quality of their lives. That leaves 99.9% of the population establishing the male-female norm. In no other area of human life do we use the existence of 0.1% variation to eliminate the reality of the 99.9%. So among those naysayers, Pete O'Brien wrote, insisting that because UCLA biologists have identified people whose characteristics are not completely male or female, then it is correct to say that not even a biologist can define woman. And Pete, I would ask how the good folks at UCLA decided what they were studying, whether they were male or female characteristics in the first place, if they can't define male and female. It would be more accurate to say that characteristics may be found in either male or female that are human characteristics, and even when they may be found with greater frequency in one of the two sexes, there are still two sexes. Spike Cunningham complained, writing, quote, "How have we stooped so low that you would be suckered into buying into the questioning of a senator with the sole purpose of making a fiasco of a judicial hearing out of all the questions you centered on the non-question," end quote. And Spike, I disagree with your characterization of Senator Blackburn's motives, but neither one of us knows her motives. My motive was to use Justice Jackson's non-answer to a non-question to demonstrate the language problem. And the last reader feedback I'll quote is Galen Gertson. "We met for coffee a few months ago to discuss our disagreement over how masking and vaccinations were being handled. We didn't change each other's minds then, and I doubt I'll change his mind now, but I will try to respond to some of the points he raised in a long email." Galen wrote, "If we are going to find unity, we are going to need to search for common ground, but yet you continue to take the viewpoints of the most radical progressives and responding to them rather than trying to find that common ground," end quote. And I agree, I do seek unity through seeking common ground. And how do we find common ground when we are not allowed to use the words needed to express our concerns? Radical progressive voices are dominating the conversation, dominating the narrative, insisting that men can become women. That's a far cry from respecting the privacy and healthcare needs of the 0.1% of the population who are born physically intersex. We could find common ground looking at how do we best support those people. This is not about hating anyone or depriving anyone of their civil rights. Live and let live. And there's a majority of Americans who would like to be left alone to live without radical progressive voices overwhelming them. Those radical progressive voices have dominated our Democrat-controlled legislature. Where are the rational progressives objecting to men who have raped women being allowed to self-identify as women and be housed in women's prisons? We can't be silent when athletes who have gone through puberty as a male self-identify as women and then compete against women who went through puberty as females. We can't ignore how the voices pushing the transgender agenda are not focused on physical objective differences. And in the end, we need a legal definition of men and women for society to function. Men are adult human males. Women are adult human females. This isn't a debate about biology. It's about cultural stereotypes that us old school feminists worked hard to banish in the 1960s and 1970s. It's about recognizing that 99.9% of humans fit into two categories, useful categories for a healthy, functioning human society. We don't want the stereotypes back, but we want the words back. Thank you for joining me, and if you'd like to be notified of when there's new features up on my Substack page, you can subscribe for an email. Right now it's free. Later on we'll be adding a subscription-only page.